The lawyer's hands trembled as he held the thick, yellowed pages of the will. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Margaret Thompson, a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes, sat straight in her chair, her heart pounding. Her son Edward leaned back, arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. "You'll get nothing from Dad's $150 million, Mom," he'd said just minutes ago, his voice sharp like a knife. Margaret's chest tightened at the memory. Why was he so cruel? She didn't understand, but she kept her face calm, like she always did when things got hard. "Before we proceed, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you watching from a sunny park in California, or maybe somewhere across the globe? Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. It's so cool to see how far this story is reaching." Back to the story. Mr. Harold Grayson, the lawyer, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. He'd been reading the will of Margaret's late husband, Robert, who passed away 10 years ago. Everyone thought Robert left just a small savings account, enough for Margaret to live quietly in their little house in Maplewood, Ohio. But today, Mr. Grayson revealed a secret. Robert had hidden $150 million, a fortune nobody knew about. Margaret's eyes widened when she heard it. $150 million? How? Robert was just an accountant, or so she thought. Mr. Grayson turned to page 4 of the will, his voice steady as he read the legal words. Then suddenly he stopped. His face went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. This can't be right," he muttered, his eyes glued to the page. Margaret leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. Edward's grin faded and he sat up, glaring. "What's wrong?" he snapped. Clara, Edward's wife, raised an eyebrow, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the table. Lily, their 12-year-old daughter, looked at Margaret with big, worried eyes. James, Margaret's younger son, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. Mr. Grayson opened his mouth, then closed it again. He reread the page silently, his lips moving slightly. Margaret's heart raced. What was on that page? Why did he stop? She wanted to ask, but her throat felt dry. Edward slammed his hand on the table. "Speak, Grayson. What does it say?" The lawyer looked up, his face still pale. "This changes everything," he said slowly, closing the file with a soft thud. "We'll need to discuss this further." He wouldn't say more, no matter how much Edward pushed. Margaret's mind spun. What secret was Robert keeping? And why was Edward so sure she'd get nothing? A month earlier, life was simpler for Margaret. She lived in her cozy, slightly worn house on Elm Street in Maplewood, Ohio. The paint on the walls was peeling a bit, and the furniture was old, but it was home. Every morning, she woke up early, made a cup of tea, and looked out at the small garden where she grew roses. She loved the way the flowers bloomed, even when the world felt heavy. At 78, Margaret was small but strong, with a smile that made everyone feel warm. Her silver hair was always tied back in a neat bun, and her eyes sparkled when she talked about her family or her old bakery. Margaret spent her days helping others. She wasn't rich, but she was rich in kindness. At the community center, she helped organize lunches for kids who didn't have enough to eat. She'd bake cookies for her neighbor, Tom Carter, a single dad who worked as a mechanic. Tom's son, Max, loved Margaret's chocolate chip cookies, and she always slipped an extra one into his lunch bag. "You're too good to us, Mrs. Thompson," Tom would say, scratching his head, embarrassed. Margaret would just laugh and say, "Kindness doesn't cost a thing, Tom." Her favorite moments were with her granddaughter, Lily. Lily was 12, with curly brown hair and a curious mind. She loved visiting Margaret, sitting at the kitchen table while Margaret taught her how to make bread. "Grandma, why do you give so much to everyone?" Lily asked one day, kneading dough with her small hands. Margaret smiled, wiping flour off Lily's cheek. "Because, sweetheart, when you're kind, you make the world a little better. It's like planting a seed. It grows even if you don't see it right away." Lily nodded, but Margaret could tell she was thinking hard about it. Margaret's younger son, James, visited often. He was a schoolteacher, gentle and quiet, with a heart like his mom's. He'd bring her groceries or fix a leaky faucet, always saying, "You don't have to do everything alone, Mom." Margaret would pat his hand and say, "I'm fine, James. Just happy to have you here." But her older son, Edward, was different. He lived in a big mansion across town with Clara and Lily. Edward was a real estate developer, always busy, always chasing money. He rarely called or visited, and when he did, he seemed cold. Margaret didn't know why, but it hurt. Still, she kept hoping he'd come around. Maybe he was just stressed, she told herself. One sunny afternoon, Margaret was in her garden with her friend Sarah Miller. Sarah was 76, loud and funny, with a laugh that echoed down the street. They were pulling weeds in the community garden when Sarah said, "Margaret, you're too nice. You give and give, but what do you get back?" Margaret shrugged, her hands in the dirt. "I don't need much, Sarah. Seeing people smile is enough." Sarah shook her head, muttering, "You're a saint, but saints get stepped on sometimes." Margaret just laughed, but deep down she wondered if Sarah was right. That same day, something strange happened. Edward showed up at her house unannounced. He stood in her small living room, his fancy suit looking out of place next to her old couch. "Mom, there's big news about Dad's estate," he said, his voice flat. Margaret blinked, confused. "Your father's estate? He left us enough to get by, didn't he?" Edward smirked, not meeting her eyes. "You'll see. Just don't get your hopes up." He left without another word, and Margaret felt a chill. What was he talking about? Robert had been gone for 10 years. What could be new? Over the next few weeks, Margaret kept busy. She helped Tom fix a flat tire on his truck, taught Lily how to make blueberry muffins, and organized a book drive at the community center. But Edward's words stuck with her, like a splinter she couldn't pull out. She didn't care about money, but why was he so sure she'd get nothing? And what was this big news? She tried to push it away, focusing on the little things that made her happy. Like the way Lily's eyes lit up when she tasted a fresh muffin. Or how Tom's son Max hugged her when she gave him a new book. Those moments made her feel rich, even if her bank account was small. One evening, Margaret was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping tea, when the phone rang. It was James. "Mom, you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. "I heard Edward's been acting weird. Something about Dad's will." Margaret sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. "I don't know, James. He said there's news, but he wouldn't tell me more. I just wish he'd talk to me like he used to." James was quiet for a moment. "I'll be there for you, Mom. Whatever happens." His words warmed her heart, but the worry didn't go away. Then a letter arrived. It was from Mr. Grayson, the family lawyer. The paper was crisp, official, with a fancy letterhead. Margaret's hands shook as she opened it. The letter said she was required to attend a reading of Robert's will at Mr. Grayson's office in 2 days. A new will? Margaret's mind spun. Robert's will had been settled years ago, hadn't it? She sat down, staring at the letter, her tea growing cold. Why now? What was Robert hiding? She thought about calling Edward to ask, but something told her he wouldn't explain. That night, the phone rang again. This time it was Edward. His voice was sharp, like he was angry before she even spoke. "Mom, don't expect anything from Dad's money. It's mine, okay? You don't need it." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. $150 million? How did Edward know? And why was he so sure she'd get nothing? "Edward, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. But he hung up without answering. Margaret stared at the phone, her heart racing. The letter from Mr. Grayson lay on the table, glowing under the kitchen light. Something big was coming, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The air in Mr. Grayson's office felt thick, like it was hard to breathe. Margaret sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, still reeling from Edward's cruel words. "You'll get nothing from Dad's $150 million, Mom." His voice echoed in her mind, sharp and cold. Across the table, Edward's face was red with anger, his eyes locked on Mr. Grayson. The lawyer clutched the will, his knuckles white, still staring at page for like it held a secret too big to say out loud. "What's on that page, Grayson?" Edward demanded, his voice loud enough to make Lily flinch. Clara, Edward's wife, leaned forward, her lips tight, like she was trying to hide a smile. James reached for Margaret's hand under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. Margaret forced a small smile for him, but her heart was racing. What had Robert written to make Mr. Grayson freeze like that? Mr. Grayson cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to Margaret, then back to the page. "I need to verify something," he said, his voice shaky. "This section is unusual." Edward slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. "Stop stalling. Read it." Margaret's stomach twisted. She didn't care about the money, not really, but Edward's anger hurt more than she could say. Why did he hate her so much? Lily looked at her grandma, her eyes wide and scared. Margaret wanted to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay, but she wasn't sure it would. Before Mr. Grayson could speak, the door to the office swung open. A woman stepped in, tall and thin, with dark hair pulled back tightly. She wore a plain gray coat, but her eyes were sharp like she knew something no one else did. "I'm Ellen Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I was told to be here for Robert Thompson's will reading." The room went silent. Margaret's mouth opened, but no words came out. Who is this woman? Edward's face turned even redder. What's she doing here? He shouted, pointing at Ellen. Clara's smile vanished, and she gripped Edward's arm. Mr. Grayson looked as confused as Margaret felt, flipping through the will like he was searching for answers. Mrs. Carter, he said slowly, can you explain your connection to Mr. Thompson? Ellen's lips curled into a small, mysterious smile. I'll wait until you finish reading, she said, sitting down in an empty chair. Edward stood up, his chair scraping the floor. This is ridiculous. Mom, did you know about this? Margaret shook her head, her mind spinning. No, Edward, I don't know her, she said softly, but her voice trembled. She looked at Ellen, searching her face for clues, but the woman just stared back, calm and unreadable. Mr. Grayson closed the will again, his hands shaking. We'll reconvene tomorrow, he said, standing up. I need to review this carefully. Edward stormed out, Clara trailing behind him. Lily ran to Margaret, hugging her tightly. Grandma, what's happening? She whispered. Margaret didn't know, but the look in Ellen's eyes made her heart pound. Who was she, and what did she know about Robert's fortune? Later that day, Margaret sat in her quiet kitchen, a cup of tea in her hands. The house felt too big, too empty, after the chaos of the will reading. She kept thinking about Robert, her husband of 40 years. He'd been a quiet man, always working late at his accounting job, coming home with ink stains on his fingers. She thought she knew everything about him. His love for old jazz records, the way he'd hum while fixing the porch swing. But $150 million? How could he hide that? And who was Ellen Carter? Margaret's mind wandered back to their early days, when they were young and scraping by, running the little bakery together. Robert would count every penny, always careful. Had he been hiding something even then? Lily knocked on the door, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Grandma, can I stay here tonight? She asked, her voice small. Margaret's heart warmed. Of course, sweetheart, she said, pulling Lily into a hug. They sat at the kitchen table, rolling out dough for cinnamon buns, just like they always did. The smell of sugar and butter filled the air, and for a moment Margaret felt peace. Grandma, Lily said, her hands sticky with dough, why is Dad so mad about the money? Doesn't he want you to have some? Margaret sighed, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. Sometimes people get confused about what really matters, she said. Money can make folks forget to be kind. But we don't need money to love each other, do we? Lily shook her head, but her eyes were worried. Margaret wished she could take that worry away. As they baked, Margaret told Lily a story from when she was young, about a time she gave her last dollar to a stranger who needed bus fare. He was so grateful, he cried, Margaret said, smiling. Kindness sticks with people, Lily. It's like a warm blanket on a cold day. Lily nodded, but Margaret could tell she was still thinking about the will reading. So was Margaret. She kept seeing Mr. Grayson's pale face, the way his hands shook on page 4. What was so shocking? And why did Edward think she'd get nothing? She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on Lily's laughter as they pulled the buns from the oven. The next morning, Margaret walked to the community center with Lily. The center was a small building with chipped paint and a creaky door, but it was the heart of Maplewood. Margaret volunteered there 3 times a week, serving meals or reading to kids. Today, she helped Tom Carter set up tables for a fundraiser. Tom was tall, with calloused hands and a shy smile. You don't have to do this, Mrs. Thompson, he said, carrying a stack of chairs. Margaret waved him off. Nonsense, Tom. Helping out makes me happy. Lily ran around, hanging streamers, her earlier worries forgotten. Margaret watched her, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe things would be okay, no matter what the will said. But the questions kept nagging at her. Why did Robert hide the money? And who was Ellen? Margaret thought about calling James to talk it over, but she didn't want to worry him. Instead, she threw herself into the fundraiser, laughing with Sarah as they arranged trays of cookies. Sarah, as usual, had an opinion. That Edward of yours is trouble, she said, shaking her head. Thinks he's too good for Maplewood. You watch out, Margaret. Margaret didn't answer, but Sarah's words stuck with her. Edward had changed so much. She remembered him as a boy, running through her garden laughing. Where had that boy gone? That afternoon, Margaret decided to clear her head by cleaning the attic. She climbed the creaky ladder, coughing as dust swirled around her. The attic was full of old boxes, some from the bakery days, some from when her kids were little. She found a photo of Robert, smiling in his old accountant's suit, and her heart ached. What were you hiding, Robert? She whispered. Then, behind a stack of books, she saw something strange, a small wooden box with a rusty lock. It wasn't hers, and she didn't remember Robert ever mentioning it. Her fingers traced the carved initials on the top, R.T. Robert Thompson. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She tugged at the lock, but it wouldn't budge. The box felt heavy, like it held something important. Was this connected to the $150 million? Or to Ellen Carter? She carried it downstairs, her mind racing. She thought about calling Mr. Grayson, but it was late, and she didn't want to seem silly. Instead, she hid the box under her bed, promising herself she'd figure it out tomorrow. But as she turned off the light, a loud knock came at the door. She opened it to find Ellen Carter standing there, her gray coat damp from the evening rain. "Mrs. Thompson," Ellen said, her voice low. "We need to talk about Robert's will." Margaret froze, her hand on the doorknob. How did Ellen know where she lived? And what did she want? Margaret's heart thumped as she stared at Ellen Carter standing on her porch, rain dripping from her gray coat. The woman's sharp eyes locked onto hers, and Margaret felt a chill that wasn't from the damp evening air. "Mrs. Thompson," Ellen said again, her voice steady but quiet. "We need to talk about Robert's will." Margaret's hand tightened on the doorknob. How did this stranger know where she lived? And why was she here late at night talking about Robert? Margaret glanced back into the house, where Lily was curled up on the couch, watching TV. She didn't want to scare her granddaughter, but curiosity and worry churned in her chest. "Come in," Margaret said, finally stepping aside. Ellen nodded and walked into the small living room, her shoes leaving wet marks on the floor. Margaret closed the door, her mind racing. The wooden box she'd found in the attic with Robert's initials carved on it was still hidden under her bed. Was Ellen connected to it? Or to the $150 million? Margaret gestured to a chair. "Sit down, please." "Can I get you some tea?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Ellen shook her head. "No, thank you. This won't take long." She sat, her posture stiff, like she was ready to leave at any moment. Margaret sat across from her, folding her hands to stop them from shaking. "What do you know about my husband's will?" she asked, keeping her tone soft but firm. Ellen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Robert and I worked together years ago. He trusted me with certain matters. I was named in his will for a reason." Margaret's breath caught. "Worked together?" Robert never mentioned in Ellen. "What kind of matters?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ellen's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You'll find out soon. Page 4 explains it." Before Margaret could press further, the front door burst open. Edward stormed in, his face twisted with anger. "What's she doing here?" he shouted, pointing at Ellen. Lily jumped up from the couch, her eyes wide. Margaret stood, stepping between Edward and Ellen. "Edward, calm down," she said, her heart pounding. "She just got here." Edward ignored her, glaring at Ellen. "You think you can just show up and claim Dad's money? Mom, you knew about this, didn't you?" Margaret's chest ached at his words. "I don't know her, Edward," she said, her voice shaking. "Why won't you believe me?" Ellen stood, unfazed by Edward's outburst. "I'm not here to fight," she said coolly. "But I have a right to be at the reading, and you can't stop me." Edward's fists clenched, and for a moment, Margaret thought he might yell again. But Clara appeared behind him, touching his arm. "Let's go, Edward," she said, her voice smooth but sharp. Edward glared at Ellen one last time, then turned to Margaret. "This isn't over, Mom." He stormed out, Clara following, leaving the room heavy with silence. Ellen looked at Margaret, her expression softening. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said. "But Robert wanted me here. You'll understand soon." She left without another word, disappearing into the rainy night. Margaret stood frozen, her mind spinning. Lily ran to her, hugging her tightly. "Grandma, who was that lady?" she asked, her voice small. Margaret smoothed Lily's hair, trying to smile. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out." Inside, though, she wasn't so sure. What did Ellen mean about Page 4? And why was Edward so angry? The next morning, Margaret took Lily to the community center to clear her mind. The sun was out, casting a warm glow over Maplewood's quiet streets. The center was buzzing with people setting up for the fundraiser. Tables were covered with bright tablecloths, and kids ran around, laughing. Margaret smiled as she helped Tom Carter carry boxes of donated clothes. "You're a lifesaver, Mrs. Thompson," Tom said, wiping sweat from his brow. Margaret waved him off. "It's nothing, Tom. Just doing my part." But her heart felt heavy. She kept thinking about Ellen, Edward, and the locked box under her bed. What secrets was Robert keeping? Lily tugged at her sleeve. "Grandma, can I help with the bake sale?" she asked, her eyes bright. Margaret nodded, grateful for the distraction. They set up a table with cookies, muffins, and the cinnamon buns they'd made the night before. As people stopped by, Margaret shared stories from her old bakery days. "Used to make these buns every Sunday," she told a neighbor, handing over a warm cookie. "Folks would line up before we even opened." Lily listened, her face glowing with pride. "Grandma's the best baker," she said to a customer, making Margaret laugh. For a moment, the worries about the will faded. Helping others, seeing Lily smile, it reminded Margaret what mattered. Sarah Miller joined them, her loud voice cutting through the chatter. "Margaret, you're working too hard again," she said, plopping down with a tray of lemonade. Margaret chuckled. "Keeps me young, Sarah." They watched the kids play, and Sarah leaned closer. "Heard about that will reading," she said, lowering her voice. "Edward's acting like he owns the world. What's going on?" Margaret sighed, glancing at Lily to make sure she wasn't listening. "I don't know, Sarah. There's a woman, Ellen, who says she knew Robert. And something on page 4 of the will, it's got everyone upset." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like trouble." "You be careful, Margaret. Money makes people do crazy things." Margaret nodded, but her thoughts drifted to the box. She hadn't told anyone about it, not even Sarah. It felt too personal, too fragile, like a secret she wasn't ready to share. She thought about Robert, how he'd always been so careful with money. Was the box part of his secret? She pushed the thought away, focusing on the fundraiser. She helped Tom sort clothes, laughed with Lily over a spilled cup of lemonade, and handed out cookies to kids. For a few hours, she felt like herself again, kind, steady, part of the community she loved. But that evening, back at home, Margaret couldn't ignore the box anymore. After Lily went to bed, she pulled it out from under her bed. The wood was smooth, the lock rusty but strong. She turned it over, her fingers brushing the carved initials, RT. Her heart ached. "Robert, what were you hiding?" She tried prying the lock with a hairpin, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, she sat back, staring at the box. Then she noticed something, a tiny piece of paper stuck in the hinge. She pulled it out carefully, unfolding it with shaking hands. It was a note in Robert's neat handwriting. "For the one who gives, not takes. Trust is the key." Margaret's breath caught. What did it mean? Was this about the $150 million? Or something else? She hid the note in her pocket, her mind racing. The box had to hold answers, maybe about Ellen or page 4, or why Edward was so sure she'd get nothing. She thought about calling Mr. Grayson, but it was late, and she didn't want to sound foolish. Instead, she decided to ask Sarah for help tomorrow. Sarah knew everyone in Maplewood. Maybe she knew a locksmith. As Margaret climbed into bed, her thoughts swirled. Robert's note felt like a clue, but to what? She closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but a loud crash outside jolted her awake. She ran to the window, pulling back the curtain. In the moonlight, she saw the community garden, her roses, Sarah's vegetables, trampled and destroyed. Someone had ruined it all. Margaret's heart sank. Who would do this? And why? Margaret's heart pounded as she stared out the window at the ruined community garden. The roses she'd tended for years were snapped at the stems, their petals scattered like confetti in the moonlight. Sarah's neat rows of vegetables, tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, were crushed, the dirt churned into a mess. Margaret's hands shook as she gripped the curtain. Who would do something so cruel? She thought of Edward's angry face at the will, reading his harsh words. "You'll get nothing, Mom." Could he be involved? No, she told herself, pushing the thought away. He was her son, not a monster. But doubt gnawed at her. The note from Robert's box, "For the one who gives, not takes," echoed in her mind. Was this destruction tied to the $150 million? Or to Ellen Carter's mysterious appearance? Lily's sleepy voice came from the couch. "Grandma, what's wrong?" Margaret turned, forcing a calm smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just a noise outside. Go back to sleep." Lily rubbed her eyes but nodded, curling up under her blanket. Margaret didn't want to scare her, but her stomach twisted with worry. She grabbed a flashlight and slipped on her coat, stepping outside to check the damage. The cold night air stung her face as she walked to the garden. The devastation was worse up close, plants uprooted, wooden stakes broken, even the little sign reading Maplewood Community Garden snapped in half. Margaret's chest ached. This garden was her haven, a place where she and Sarah taught kids like Lily about kindness and growth. Now it was gone. She shone the flashlight around, looking for clues. Near the edge of the garden, she spotted footprints in the mud, big ones like a man's boots. Her heart skipped. They led toward the street, then stopped at tire marks. Someone had come and gone quickly. Margaret's mind raced. Was this a random act or something more? She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? She had no proof, just a bad feeling. Instead, she went back inside, locking the door tightly. The wooden box under her bed felt heavier in her thoughts, its locked secrets weighing her down. She couldn't shake the feeling that the garden's destruction was connected to Robert's will, to page 4, to Ellen. The next morning, Margaret called Sarah. "The garden's ruined," she said, her voice trembling. Sarah gasped. "Ruined? Who'd do that?" Margaret didn't know, but she told Sarah about the footprints and tire marks. "I'm coming over," Sarah said, her tone fierce. An hour later, she arrived, her face red with anger as she surveyed the garden. "This is low, Margaret," she said, kicking a broken stake. "Someone's trying to hurt you." Margaret shook her head, not wanting to believe it. "Maybe it was kids playing a prank," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sarah snorted. "Kids don't smash a whole garden like that. This feels personal." Margaret changed the subject, pulling the wooden box from under her bed. She showed Sarah the note. "For the one who gives, not takes. Trust is the key." Sarah's eyes widened. "Robert wrote this? What's it mean?" Margaret shrugged, her fingers tracing the lock. "I don't know, but I need to open this box. It might explain the will or Ellen or something." Sarah nodded. "My cousin's a locksmith. I'll call him." As Sarah made the call, Margaret sat with Lily, who was eating breakfast. "Grandma, why would someone hurt the garden?" Lily asked, her voice small. Margaret sighed, squeezing her hand. "Some people lash out when they're angry or scared. But we'll fix it, Lily. We'll plant new seeds." Lily nodded, but her eyes were sad. Margaret's heart ached. She hated seeing Lily like this. While they waited for the locksmith, Margaret took Lily to the community center. The fundraiser was still going, though the mood was quieter after news of the garden spread. Tom Carter approached, his face worried. "Heard about the garden, Mrs. Thompson. Anything I can do?" Margaret smiled, touched by his kindness. "Just keep being you, Tom," she said. They sorted donations together, and Margaret told Lily stories about her bakery days to cheer her up. "Your grandpa and I used to give free bread to anyone who was hungry," she said. "Didn't matter if they could pay. Kindness always comes back, Lily." Lily smiled, but Margaret could tell she was still thinking about the garden. James stopped by, his face drawn. "Mom, I heard about the garden," he said, pulling her aside. "This isn't right. Edward was acting strange yesterday, talking about taking control of the estate. I don't trust him." Margaret's stomach dropped. "James, you don't think?" She couldn't finish the sentence. James shook his head. "I don't know, Mom. But I'm here for you." They hugged, and Margaret felt a flicker of strength. James was her rock, always had been. But his words about Edward stayed with her, mixing with the mystery of the box and Ellen's visit. She felt like she was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. That afternoon, Sarah's cousin, a burly man named Mike, arrived with tools to open the box. Margaret set it on the kitchen table, her hands trembling. Mike worked carefully, muttering about the old lock. Lily watched, her eyes wide. "What's in there, Grandma?" she asked. Margaret smiled, trying to hide her nerves. "We'll find out soon, sweetheart." With a soft click, the lock gave way. Margaret lifted the lid, her breath catching. Inside was a stack of papers, yellowed with age, and a small photo of Robert standing in front of a building with a sign. Hope House. Margaret's heart skipped. Hope House was a charity she'd heard of, one that helped families in need. Why did Robert have this? She unfolded the top paper, a letter in Robert's handwriting. It read, "Margaret, my love, I built something for those who need it most. The fortune is for giving, not keeping. But only the kind can carry it forward. Look for the trust." The words hit her like a wave. Robert had been funding a charity. Was this the $150 million? She scanned the other papers, bank statements, legal forms, all tied to Hope House. One name stood out, Ellen Carter, listed as a trustee. Margaret's head spun. Ellen wasn't just someone who worked with Robert. She was part of his secret. But there was more. A second letter, half torn, mentioned a condition for the inheritance, something about proving worth. The rest was missing. Before Margaret could process it, the phone rang. It was Edward, his voice loud and furious. "Mom, I know you've got something of Dad's. A box, papers, something. I'm coming over, and you're giving it to me." Margaret's heart raced. How did he know about the box? Had someone seen her take it downstairs? She clutched the papers, her mind racing. "Edward, calm down," she said, but he cut her off. "No more games, Mom. That money's mine." The line went dead. Margaret stared at the open box, the photo of Robert smiling at her. What had he done? And who was trying to stop her from finding out? Margaret's hand trembled as she set the phone down, Edward's angry words echoing in her ears. "That money's mine." Her eyes darted to the open wooden box on the kitchen table, its contents, papers, a photo of Robert at Hope House, and that cryptic letter, sprawled out like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't solve. How did Edward know about the box? Had someone been watching her? She glanced at Lily, who was staring wide-eyed from the couch, clutching a pillow. "Grandma, is Dad coming here?" Lily asked, her voice small. Margaret forced a smile, her heart racing. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she said, but her mind was spinning. The papers mentioned Hope House, a charity, and Ellen Carter as a trustee. Was this what page 4 of the will was about? And why was Edward so desperate? Before she could think, there was a loud knock at the door. Margaret's stomach dropped. She hid the papers back in the box and slid it under the table, motioning for Lily to stay quiet. She opened the door to find Edward, his face red, his eyes blazing. Clara stood behind him, her arms crossed, a cold smile on her lips. "Where is it, Mom?" Edward demanded, pushing past her into the house. Margaret stepped in front of him, her small frame blocking his path. "Edward, stop this," she said, her voice firm despite the fear in her chest. "I don't know what you're talking about." Edward laughed, a harsh sound. "Don't play dumb. I heard you found something of Dad's. A box. Papers. Hand it over." Lily stood up, her voice trembling. "Dad, leave Grandma alone." Edward ignored her, scanning the room like a hunter. Clara stepped forward, her voice smooth. "Margaret, let's not make this difficult. We're family after all." Margaret's heart ached. Family? Edward hadn't acted like family in years. She thought of Robert's note. "For the one who gives, not takes." She straightened her shoulders. "I don't have anything for you, Edward," she said quietly. "If there's something in the will, we'll find out at the next reading." Edward's face twisted, and for a moment, she thought he might push past her again. But Clara touched his arm, whispering something, and he stormed out, slamming the door. Margaret let out a shaky breath, hugging Lily tightly. What was Edward so afraid of losing? The next day, Margaret decided to learn more about Hope House. She couldn't shake the feeling that the charity was the key to Robert's secret, and maybe to page 4. She left Lily with Sarah and drove to the library, where she searched old records on a clunky computer. Hope House, she found, was a small charity that helped families like Tom Carter's, providing food, clothes, and school supplies. Robert's name appeared in old articles as a donor, but always quietly, never seeking attention. Margaret's heart swelled with pride, then ached with confusion. Why hadn't he told her? She found one photo of Robert at a Hope House event, standing next to a younger Ellen Carter. They were smiling, shaking hands. So Ellen was part of this, but how? Back home, Margaret sat with the box, rereading Robert's letter. The fortune is for giving, not keeping. She felt a spark of hope. Maybe Robert's money was meant to help people, not tear her family apart. She thought about calling Mr. Grayson, but before she could, Sarah arrived with a tray of cookies. "Figured you needed these," Sarah said, her eyes twinkling. Margaret laughed, grateful for her friend's warmth. They sat in the garden, what was left of it, sipping tea. The broken plants still hurt to see, but Margaret was already planning to rebuild. "We'll plant new roses," she told Sarah. "It'll take time, but things grow back stronger." Lily ran out, holding a drawing she'd made of the garden, full of bright flowers. "This is how it'll look, Grandma," she said, her face glowing. Margaret hugged her, feeling a warmth that pushed away her worries, if only for a moment. "You're right, sweetheart," she said. "We'll make it beautiful again." She told Lily a story about a time she and Robert replanted the garden after a storm. "Your grandpa said, 'Keep going, Margaret. Things break, but we fix them with love.' That's what we'll do." Lily nodded, her eyes serious. Margaret felt a surge of love for her granddaughter, and for Robert's memory. Whatever his secret, she'd honor it by staying kind. As the sun set, Margaret helped Sarah clean up the garden debris. Tom stopped by, offering to bring new soil from his shop. "You don't have to, Tom," Margaret said, but he shook his head. "You've done so much for me and Max, Mrs. Thompson. This is the least I can do." Margaret smiled, her heart full. This was what Robert meant, she thought, giving, not taking. But the box and its secrets still loomed. She needed to know more about Hope House and Ellen's role. Maybe then she'd understand page 4. That evening, Margaret's phone rang. It was Mr. Grayson, his voice low and urgent. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to speak with you privately," he said. "It's about page 4. There's a condition in the will, a test, you could say. It could change everything." Margaret's heart raced. "What kind of test?" she asked, gripping the phone. Before he could answer, she heard a commotion on his end, shouting, then a crash. "Mrs. Thompson, I have to go. Mr. Grayson said quickly. Edward's here, and he's furious. Stay safe. The line went dead. Margaret stared at the phone, her blood running cold. Edward was at the lawyer's office? What was he doing? And what was this test that could change everything? Margaret's hand shook as she set the phone down, Mr. Grayson's urgent words ringing in her ears. Edward's here, and he's furious. Her heart pounded. What was Edward doing at the lawyer's office? And what was this test on page for that could change everything? She glanced at the wooden box on the kitchen table, its papers about Hope House and Robert's cryptic note. For the one who gives, not takes, staring back at her. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, with no idea what was below. Lily looked up from her drawing, her pencil pausing. "Grandma, you okay?" she asked, her voice small. Margaret forced a smile, not wanting to worry her. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said, but her mind was racing. Edward's anger, Ellen's mysterious visit, the ruined garden. It all felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite fit together. She thought about calling James, but it was late, and she didn't want to drag him into this mess yet. Instead, she tucked the box under her bed again, her fingers lingering on Robert's photo. His smile seemed to hold a secret, one she was desperate to understand. She went to bed, but sleep didn't come. Every creak of the house made her jump, her thoughts swirling with images of Edward's red face and Mr. Grayson's shaky voice. What was her son capable of? And what did Robert mean by a test? The next morning, Margaret drove to Mr. Grayson's office, determined to get answers. The small brick building looked ordinary, but as she stepped inside, the air felt heavy. Mr. Grayson was at his desk, his glasses crooked, papers scattered around him. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, looking up with tired eyes. "I'm sorry about last night." Edward, he was upset. Margaret sat down, her hands clasped tightly. "What happened, Mr. Grayson? What's on page 4? The lawyer sighed, rubbing his forehead. "It's a condition Robert set," he said slowly. "A test of character. The fortune, $150 million, is tied to it. But I can't say more until we reconvene officially. Edward's trying to challenge the will, and I need to be careful." Margaret's heart sank. A test of character? What did that mean? Before she could ask, the door opened, and Edward stormed in, Clara behind him. "Mom, you're here?" Edward snapped, his eyes narrowing. "What are you and Grayson plotting?" Margaret stood, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "I'm just trying to understand, Edward. Why are you so angry?" He laughed, a bitter sound. "You think you're getting that money? Dad didn't trust you with it. That's why he hid it." His words cut deep, but Margaret held his gaze. "I don't care about the money," she said. "I care about the truth." Edward's face twisted, and he turned to Mr. Grayson. "Read the will now. No more delays." The lawyer shook his head. "Not until tomorrow, Edward. There are legal steps." Edward slammed his fist on the desk, making Margaret flinch. "This isn't over," he growled, storming out with Clara in tow. Margaret sat back down, her hands trembling. "Mr. Grayson, please," she said softly. "What's this test?" He looked at her, his eyes kind but guarded. "It's about who Robert believed deserved the fortune," he said. "But it's complicated, Mrs. Thompson. Trust me, you'll know soon." He wouldn't say more, and Margaret left the office feeling more confused than ever. As she drove home, she thought about Robert's note. Trust is the key. Was the test about trust? Or kindness? She didn't know, but Edward's anger scared her. What would he do next? Back home, Margaret needed something to calm her nerves. She found Tom Carter working on his old truck in his driveway, tools scattered around him. "Need a hand?" she asked, smiling. Tom looked up, surprised. "Mrs. Thompson, you don't have to do that," he said, but she waved him off. "Keeps me busy," she said, grabbing a wrench. They worked together, tightening bolts and chatting about small things, Max's school, the weather, the ruined garden. Tom shook his head. "I still can't believe someone wrecked it," he said. "You've done so much for us, Mrs. Thompson. You don't deserve that." Margaret's heart warmed. "Kindness comes back, Tom," she said. "Maybe not right away, but it does." As they worked, Margaret thought about Lily. Edward's anger was pulling her granddaughter into this mess, and that hurt more than anything. She remembered a day years ago when Edward was little, helping her fix a broken fence, laughing as they hammered nails. Where had that boy gone? She felt a pang of guilt, maybe she'd failed him somehow. But then she thought of Robert, how he'd always said, "Keep giving, Margaret. It's what makes us strong." She held on to that, letting it steady her. Helping Tom, even with something as simple as a truck, reminded her who she was. She wasn't fighting for money, she was fighting for her family, for Robert's truth. Later, Margaret sat with Lily in the living room, playing a board game to lighten the mood. Lily moved her piece, giggling when she won a point. "Grandma, you're letting me win," she teased. Margaret laughed, ruffling her hair. "Maybe I am," she said. "But winning's not everything. It's about having fun together." Lily nodded, but her smile faded. "Dad's so mad all the time," she said quietly. "I don't like it." Margaret hugged her tightly. "I know, sweetheart. But we'll get through this. We've got each other." She meant it, but worry gnawed at her. Edward's fury, the test in the will, the box, it was all closing in. That evening, Lily went to bed early, tired from the day. Margaret was cleaning up when she heard a soft knock. She opened the door to find Sarah, her face pale. "Margaret, you need to hear this," she said, stepping inside. "I was at the diner, and I overheard something." Margaret's stomach twisted. "What?" Sarah leaned closer, her voice low. "Lily was there earlier with Clara. She heard Clara and Edward talking, planning something. They said they're going to prove you're not fit to handle the will. They're going to say you're too old, that you can't be trusted." Margaret's breath caught. Her own son, trying to discredit her? She felt a mix of hurt and anger, but most of all, fear for Lily. "She heard them?" Margaret asked, her voice shaking. Sarah nodded. "She ran to the diner, upset, and told me." "She's scared, Margaret." Before Margaret could respond, the phone rang. It was Lily calling from her room upstairs, her voice trembling. "Grandma, I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier," she sobbed. "I heard Mom and Dad talking. They're going to take you to court. They want to take me away from you." Margaret's heart stopped. "Take Lily away?" She gripped the phone, her voice steady despite the panic rising inside her. "Lily, you're not going anywhere. I promise." But as she hung up, the room seemed to spin. Edward wasn't just after the money. He was trying to tear her family apart. What would he do next? Margaret's heart pounded as she hung up the phone, Lily's tearful words echoing in her mind. "They're going to take me away from you." Her hands shook, and she sank into a chair, the weight of Edward's betrayal pressing down on her. Her own son, planning to take her to court, to claim she wasn't fit to handle Robert's will, and worse, to keep Lily from her. She thought of the wooden box under her bed, Robert's note about giving, not taking, and the mysterious test Mr. Grayson mentioned. Was this what Edward was so afraid of? That she'd pass some kind of test and get the $150 million? She didn't care about the money, but losing Lily, that was unthinkable. Sarah stood nearby, her face tight with worry. "Margaret, what are you going to do?" she asked. Margaret took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know yet," she said softly, "but I won't let them hurt Lily." She went upstairs to find Lily curled up in bed, her eyes red from crying. Margaret sat beside her, brushing a curl from her face. "Sweetheart, you're not going anywhere," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I promise." Lily sniffled, hugging her tightly. "Why is Dad doing this, Grandma?" she asked. Margaret's heart ached. She wanted to explain, to make it all make sense, but she didn't fully understand herself. "Sometimes people get lost in wanting things," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But we'll figure this out together." Lily nodded, clinging to her. Margaret stayed until Lily fell asleep, her small hand in hers. As she tiptoed out, she felt a fire in her chest. Edward could fight for the money, but he wouldn't take her granddaughter. The next morning, Margaret called James. "Edward's planning to take me to court," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "He wants to prove I'm not fit for the will, and keep Lily away." James was silent for a moment, then his voice came through, angry but controlled. "Mom, he's gone too far. I'll talk to him." Margaret hesitated. "Be careful, James. He's not himself." After hanging up, she felt a flicker of hope. James was on her side, and Lily was safe for now. But Edward's plan, and the mystery of page 4, loomed like a storm cloud. She needed to know more about Robert's test, and she needed to protect her family. Determined to stay strong, Margaret took Lily to the community center. The fundraiser was winding down, but the mood was warm, with neighbors chatting and kids playing. Margaret helped set up a storytelling corner, reading to a group of children, including Tom's son, Max. She chose a book about a gardener who rebuilt her flowers after a storm, her voice soft but steady. "Sometimes things get broken," she read, glancing at Lily, "but with love and care they grow back even better." The kids clapped and Lily smiled, her worries easing for a moment. Margaret felt a spark of pride. This was why she kept going, because kindness like those flowers could heal. After the reading, Tom pulled her aside. "Mrs. Thompson, I heard about Edward," he said, his voice low. If you need anything, help with the garden or just someone to talk to, I'm here. Margaret smiled, touched. Thank you, Tom. You're a good friend. As they talked, Sarah joined them, carrying a tray of lemonade. Margaret, you're a saint, she said, shaking her head. All this going on and you're still here helping. Margaret shrugged. It's what I do, Sarah. Keeps me grounded. But inside, she was anything but grounded. Edward's threat, the ruined garden, the box, it all swirled in her mind. She thought of Robert's note. Trust is the key. She had to trust herself to get through this. Back home, Margaret sat with Lily, helping her with homework. They laughed over a math problem, and for a moment, life felt normal. Margaret told Lily a story from her bakery days, about a time she gave free cupcakes to a family who'd lost their home. They hugged me so tight, she said, smiling. Kindness doesn't need a reason, Lily. It just feels right. Lily nodded, her eyes bright. I want to be like you, Grandma, she said. Margaret's heart swelled, but worry crept in. What if Edward's plan worked? What if she lost Lily? She pushed the thought away, focusing on her granddaughter's smile. That evening, Margaret was washing dishes when she heard a commotion outside. She looked out the window and gasped. The community center, just across the street, was glowing with an eerie orange light. Flames licked the side of the building, smoke curling into the night sky. Lily, stay here, Margaret shouted, grabbing her phone and running outside. Neighbors were already gathering, shouting for help. Tom appeared, his face pale. I called the fire department, he said, pulling Margaret back from the heat. The fire was small but growing, eating through the wooden wall where the fundraiser supplies were stored. Margaret's heart sank. First the garden, now this? It couldn't be a coincidence. As sirens wailed in the distance, Margaret spotted something that made her blood run cold. Across the street, in the shadows, a figure stood watching the flames. The streetlight caught his face for a moment, Edward. Her son, standing there, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and disappeared into the dark. Margaret's knees felt weak. Was Edward behind this? Had he gone that far? She clutched her phone, her mind racing. The fire trucks arrived, spraying water, but the damage was done. Part of the center was charred, and Margaret's heart broke. This was her community, her home. And now, it felt like someone was trying to burn it all down. Margaret's heart pounded as she stood in the smoky glow of the fire truck's lights, the charred wall of the community center looming like a wound. The image of Edward's face in the shadows, watching the flames, burned in her mind. Her son, could he really have done this? The thought made her chest ache, but the evidence was piling up. The ruined garden, his threats about the will, and now this fire. She clutched her coat tighter, the cold night air biting her skin. Neighbors shouted, helping firefighters carry buckets, while Tom stayed close, his face grim. Mrs. Thompson, you okay? He asked, his voice low. Margaret nodded, but her hands trembled. I saw Edward, she whispered, barely able to say it. Tom's eyes widened, but he didn't press her. The sirens wailed, and Margaret felt like the world was slipping out of her control. Back inside, Lily ran to her, eyes wide with fear. Grandma, what happened? She cried, hugging her tightly. Margaret smoothed her hair, trying to stay calm. There was a fire, sweetheart, but the firefighters are handling it. We're safe. But she didn't feel safe. The community center was more than a building. It was where she read to kids, where she and Sarah planned the garden, where she taught Lily about kindness. And now part of it was gone. She thought of Robert's note in the box. For the one who gives, not takes. Was this someone's attempt to stop her from giving? To break her spirit? She wouldn't let it. The next morning, the police were at the center, taping off the burned section. An officer, a young woman named Officer Daniels, approached Margaret. Mrs. Thompson, we're investigating this as possible arson, she said, her tone serious. Any idea who might have done this? Margaret hesitated, Edward's face flashing in her mind. She wanted to tell the truth, but accusing her son without proof felt wrong. I don't know, she said, her voice shaky. But the garden was destroyed a few days ago. It feels connected. Officer Daniels nodded, jotting notes. We'll look into it. If you think of anything, let us know. Margaret nodded, but her stomach twisted. She needed answers not just about the fire but about Robert's will, Ellen and Paige for. Determined to rebuild, Margaret rallied the community. By noon, neighbors gathered at the center, bringing tools and supplies. Tom hauled lumber, Sarah organized volunteers, and even Lily helped paint a new sign. Margaret's heart lifted, seeing everyone come together. We'll make it better than before, she told the group, her voice strong. A woman named Mrs. Lee, whose kids Margaret had fed at the center, squeezed her hand. You've always been there for us, Margaret. Now it's our turn. Tears stung Margaret's eyes, but she smiled. This was what Robert meant, kindness growing, like seeds in a garden. But the shadow of Edward's actions hung over her. She couldn't ignore what she'd seen. Later, Margaret sat with James at her kitchen table, the wooden box between them. She showed him the papers about Hope House, Robert's letter, and the photo of him with Ellen. James frowned, running a hand through his hair. Dad was funding a charity? Why didn't he tell us? Margaret sighed, her fingers tracing Robert's handwriting. I don't know, James. But this test Mr. Grayson mentioned, it's got to be about giving. Edward doesn't understand that. James nodded, his face troubled. I talked to him, Mom. He's obsessed with the money. Said you're too old to handle it. I told him he's wrong, but... He trailed off and Margaret's heart ached. James was caught in the middle, and she hated that. They sorted through Robert's old photos, finding more of him at Hope House events, handing out coats, serving meals, always with that quiet smile. Margaret's chest swelled with love and confusion. How had she not known this side of him? One photo showed Robert with a group of kids, including a young boy who looked like Tom Carter. Tom, she murmured, showing James. He nodded. Could be. Dad helped a lot of people, didn't he? Margaret smiled, but her thoughts drifted to Edward. If Robert's test was about kindness, Edward was failing it. She wanted to believe he could change, but after the fire, doubt crept in. As evening fell, Margaret felt a spark of hope. The community's support, James's loyalty, Lily's love, it reminded her why she kept going. She tucked the box away, promising herself she'd talk to Mr. Grayson tomorrow. She needed to know about the test, about page 4, before Edward did something worse. But as she locked the door, her phone rang. It was Mr. Grayson, his voice tense. Mrs. Thompson, I've reviewed the will again, he said. Page 4 names a specific beneficiary for the $150 million tied to Hope House. But there's a problem. Margaret's heart raced. What problem? She asked. There was a pause, then a rustling sound like papers falling. Someone sent a threatening letter, Mr. Grayson said, his voice low. It warns me not to reveal the beneficiary. I think it's from someone close to Edward. Before she could respond, the line crackled, and a loud thud echoed through the phone. Mr. Grayson? Margaret called, but the call cut off. Her hands shook as she stared at the phone, fear gripping her. Who was threatening the lawyer? And what was Edward hiding now? Margaret's heart pounded as the phone went silent, Mr. Grayson's last words echoing in her ears. It warns me not to reveal the beneficiary. The thud on the other end of the call made her stomach lurch. Was the lawyer okay? And who sent a threatening letter tied to Edward? She gripped the phone, her hands trembling, the weight of the past weeks, Edward's betrayal, the ruined garden, the community center fire, pressing down on her. She glanced at the wooden box under her bed, Robert's papers about Hope House, and his cryptic note. For the one who gives, not takes, feeling like a lifeline. Was the beneficiary named on page for the key to everything? And was Edward desperate enough to threaten Mr. Grayson to keep it secret? Margaret's mind raced, but she took a deep breath. She had to stay strong for Lily, for James, for the community she loved. She called James immediately, her voice shaking as she told him about the call. Mom, I'm coming over, he said, his tone firm. And I'm calling the police to check on Grayson. Margaret nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Be careful, James, she said, her heart heavy. After hanging up, she sat in the quiet kitchen, the photo of Robert at Hope House staring up at her from the table. His smile felt like a promise, urging her to keep going. She thought of Lily sleeping upstairs and the community rallying to rebuild the center. Whatever Edward was doing, she wouldn't let him destroy what mattered most. The next morning, James arrived with news. The police checked on Mr. Grayson, he said, sitting across from Margaret. He's fine, just shaken. Someone left a letter on his desk, unsigned, but it said to stop the will reading or there'd be consequences. He thinks it's linked to Edward. Margaret's chest tightened. Edward? She whispered, still struggling to believe it. James nodded, his face grim. I confronted him, Mom. He denied it, but he was nervous, like he's hiding something. Margaret's mind flashed to Edward's face in the shadows during the fire. She hadn't told anyone but Tom, afraid to admit her son could be capable of such things. We need to know what's on page 4, she said. It's time. Determined, Margaret and James drove to Mr. Grayson's office. The lawyer looked exhausted, his desk cluttered with papers, but he managed a small smile. Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry for last night, he said. But I'm ready to finish this. He opened the will, his hands steadier now, and turned to page 4. The room felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Robert left the $150 million to you, Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice clear. Margaret's breath caught. Me? She asked, stunned. Mr. Grayson nodded. But there's a condition, a test. The fortune is to be distributed to the community through Hope House, but only if the family proves they value kindness over greed. If not, the money goes elsewhere. He paused, looking at her with respect. Robert believed you'd pass the test, Margaret. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Robert had trusted her to carry on his work, to give, not take. But before she could speak, Edward burst into the office, Clara behind him. What's going on? He demanded, his face red. Mr. Grayson stood, holding up the will. Edward, your father's wishes are clear. The money is for Margaret to manage, for Hope House, unless the family fails his test of kindness. Edward's eyes widened, then narrowed. This is a trick, he shouted. Mom's too old to handle that money. I'll fight this in court. Clara grabbed his arm, whispering, but Edward shook her off. You'll regret this, Mom, he said, his voice low and cold, before storming out. Margaret's heart ached, but she felt a strange calm. Robert's trust in her was a gift, one she wouldn't waste. She looked at James, who squeezed her hand. You've got this, Mom, he said softly. Lily, who'd been quiet in the corner, ran to her, hugging her tightly. I knew you'd do the right thing, Grandma, she whispered. Margaret smiled, her resolve strengthening. Edward could fight, but she'd honor Robert's legacy. Back home, Margaret threw herself into rebuilding the community center. The fire damage was bad, but the community's spirit was stronger. Tom brought lumber, Sarah organized a cleanup crew, and neighbors donated paint and supplies. Margaret worked alongside them, her small frame tireless as she carried boards and swept debris. You don't slow down, do you? Sarah said, half laughing, half scolding. Margaret chuckled, wiping sweat from her brow. Got to keep moving, Sarah. It's what Robert would have wanted. She told Lily stories of Hope House, how Robert had quietly helped families like Tom's, giving without expecting anything back. That's what we'll do with the money, she said. Help people like he did. Lily nodded, her eyes bright. Can I help, Grandma? She asked. Margaret hugged her. You already are, sweetheart. They painted a wall together, laughing when paint splattered on Lily's nose. For a moment, Margaret felt peace. The community's love, Lily's trust, it was worth more than $150 million. But Edward's threat lingered. She knew he wouldn't give up easily. She'd set boundaries, telling him he needed to change if he wanted to be part of her life, but forgiving him was harder. Still, she held on to hope, remembering Robert's words about trust. As the day ended, Margaret stood outside the center, watching the sunset. The new sign, painted by Lily, read, Hope House Community Center. It felt right, like a promise kept. She thought of Edward, her heart heavy but open. He was lost, but maybe not forever. She'd give him a chance to change, just as Robert had given her a chance to lead. The community gathered around, cheering as they unveiled the sign. Margaret smiled, tears in her eyes. This was her legacy, kindness, growing like seeds in a garden. But as the crowd dispersed, Officer Daniels approached, her face serious. Mrs. Thompson, we found something, she said, holding up a charred piece of cloth. It's from the fire. Matches a jacket Edward was seen wearing that night. Margaret's heart stopped. Proof, at last, that Edward was involved. Before she could speak, a car screeched to a stop nearby. Edward stepped out, his face pale, holding a letter. Mom, we need to talk, he said, his voice shaking. I didn't mean for things to go this far. Margaret stared at him, her heart torn between hurt and hope. What had he done? And could she ever trust him again? Margaret's breath caught as Edward stood before her, clutching a crumpled letter, his face pale and his eyes darting nervously. The charred cloth in Officer Daniels' hand, a piece of Edward's jacket from the night of the community center fire, felt like a weight in the air between them. Mom, we need to talk, Edward said, his voice low and shaky, so different from the angry shouts she'd heard for weeks. Her heart twisted, torn between the hurt of his betrayal and a flicker of hope. Was he here to confess? To change? The crowd around the newly painted Hope House Community Center sign had gone quiet, neighbors watching, sensing the tension. Lily stepped closer to Margaret, her small hand slipping into her grandma's. Margaret squeezed it, drawing strength from her granddaughter's trust. Edward, she said, her voice steady but soft. What have you done? Edward's shoulders slumped, and he looked down at the letter in his hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said, his words stumbling. The garden, the fire, I was angry, Mom. I thought Dad's money was mine, that you didn't deserve it. Margaret's chest ached, his confession hitting like a punch. The garden she'd poured her heart into, the community center where she'd built memories with Lily. Her own son had tried to destroy them. She wanted to yell, to ask why, but she remembered Robert's note. For the one who gives, not takes. She took a deep breath, keeping her eyes on Edward. Why, Edward? She asked quietly. Why hurt the people I love? He flinched, like her words stung. I was wrong, he said, his voice breaking. Clara kept pushing me, saying we needed the money for our future for Lily. But it wasn't just her. I let greed take over. He held up the letter, his hands shaking. This is from Dad. I found it in Clara's desk. It's about the will. Margaret's heart skipped. Another letter from Robert? She reached for it, her fingers trembling. Officer Daniels stepped closer, her eyes sharp. Mr. Thompson, we need to discuss the fire, she said, holding up the cloth. Edward nodded, his face pale. I know. I'll tell you everything. Margaret's mind spun. What was in the letter? And could she trust Edward now? The police took Edward to the station for questioning, and Margaret sat in her kitchen, the letter from Robert in her hands. Lily was at Sarah's, safe for now, and James sat across from her, his face worried but supportive. Margaret unfolded the letter, her heart pounding. Robert's neat handwriting filled the page. Edward, my son, I know you're driven, but don't let greed blind you. The fortune is for giving, for building, not for keeping. If you're reading this, you've seen the will. Pass the test. Choose kindness like your mother always has. Tears stung Margaret's eyes. Robert had known Edward might struggle, but he'd hoped he could change. She looked at James, her voice soft. He left this for Edward to guide him. But Edward didn't listen. James nodded, his jaw tight. He's trying now, Mom. Maybe it's not too late. Margaret wanted to believe him, but the pain of Edward's actions, the garden, the fire, his plan to take Lily, cut deep. Still, she thought of Robert's test, the one she'd passed by giving to her community. Maybe Edward could pass it too, in his own way. She decided to visit him at the police station, to hear him out. She owed it to Robert, to Lily, and maybe even to herself. At the station, Edward sat in a small room, his head in his hands. Officer Daniels let Margaret in, saying, he's cooperating. Admitted to damaging the garden and starting the fire, though he says it was meant to scare, not destroy. Margaret's heart sank, but she sat across from Edward, her hands folded. Tell me the truth, she said, her voice calm but firm. Edward looked up, his eyes red. I was desperate, Mom, he said. Clara found out about Dad's fortune years ago before he died. She pushed me to claim it, said you'd waste it on the community. I let her convince me. He paused, swallowing hard. The fire was a mistake. I just wanted to stop the fundraiser, to make you look weak. I'm so sorry. Margaret's throat tightened. She wanted to be angry, but she saw the boy he used to be, her Edward, laughing in the garden, helping her bake. You hurt a lot of people, she said, her voice steady. But you're my son and I love you. You have a chance to make this right. Edward nodded, tears falling. I want a mom. For you, for Lily. Margaret reached across the table, squeezing his hand. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. She thought of Robert's words. Trust is the key. Maybe trust could rebuild what greed had broken. Back in Maplewood, Margaret threw herself into finishing the community center. The burned wall was rebuilt, painted bright with murals by Lily and the neighborhood kids. Tom installed new shelves, Sarah planted fresh flowers, and neighbors donated chairs and books. Margaret stood in the center, now officially Hope House Community Center, her heart full. At the reopening, she spoke to the crowd, her voice clear. This place is for all of us, she said. Robert left a fortune to help our community, and that's what we'll do together. The crowd cheered and Lily hugged her, whispering, You're the best, Grandma. Edward faced consequences for the fire, community service and a fine, but he began to change. He helped rebuild the garden, working quietly beside Margaret, planting roses. It was slow, awkward, but a step. Clara, shamed by Edward's confession, left town for a while, giving Margaret and Lily space to heal. James stayed close, helping manage Hope House's funds, ensuring every dollar went to families in need. Margaret taught Lily about giving, just as Robert had taught her. Kindness is like a seed, she said one day, planting a rose with her granddaughter. It grows even in hard times. As weeks passed, Margaret felt Robert's presence in every smile at the center, every meal served, every child who laughed. The $150 million was a tool, not a prize. It built homes, funded schools, and fed families through Hope House. Edward visited often, quieter now, learning to give without expecting anything back. One evening, he brought Lily to the center, his eyes soft. I'm trying, Mom, he said. Margaret nodded, her heart opening. I know, Edward. Keep going. Standing in the garden, watching Lily run through the new roses, Margaret felt peace. Robert's test wasn't just for her, it was for all of them. She'd passed it by staying true to herself, and now Edward was finding his way. The community thrived, stronger than ever, proof that kindness could outshine greed. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over Maplewood, Margaret smiled. She'd kept Robert's promise, and that was worth more than any fortune. I hope you stayed with us until the very end. If this story touched your heart, even for a moment, I'd be so grateful if you could leave a comment and let me know you were here. Thank you for watching.